As I mentioned, we're going to be joined for a few minutes by Randy Stapilus from Idaho Weekly Briefing. It's 8:43. We've got 41 and some rain, which is hammering away at the ice and may help melt some of it today, but we will cool down tonight below freezing, and probably that will help, though, at least offset some of the flooding that could happen. And we wanted to point out Randy joins us between 8:40 and 9 o'clock on Monday mornings. Today being no different on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. Randy, first of all, there's been a lot of discussion. Tomorrow, in fact, the people who are behind this petition that looks to ban abortion in Idaho are going to be making an appearance with me on the show. Right now, it's centered in the northern part of the state, but you've been paying in particular close attention to this. What's your take? Are they going to have any traction?
Well, it's possible. There have been a whole lot of people for many, many years in Idaho who have argued just plainly, flatly, abortion is murder, and implicitly, at least, that it should be punished as such. And the people who are behind the petition make the point that there is a reference in Idaho code to abortion as murder, but there is a prohibition, evidently reflecting the Roe v. Wade decision, on prosecuting it in that way. So their intent essentially would be to open the doors to allow for prosecution of it. So the questions that I would find really interesting to see where Idahoans and which Idahoans come down where is first, is abortion murder? Is that something that a proposition that you want to get behind? And second, if it is, then should it be prosecuted the same as any other in that category? Somebody who just say shoot somebody else in the street, should it be prosecuted in the same kind of manner and punished in the same kind of manner? And if not, why not?
As I understand it,
I think there's a really provocative question there that may get toward the heart of one way or another, working out where a lot of Idahoans come from on this issue.
As I understand it, they cite a 5-year-old case where a man was convicted not only of killing his wife, but she was carrying the child at the time. So he was convicted of 2 killings. And this is the loophole that they're pointing at, that if she had gone to an abortion clinic, then willingly she had gone, this would not have been homicide. But because the baby was killed inside her womb, the law convicted him of the double murder.
It's really kind of it's an attempt at a compromise in an area where compromise is kind of difficult. If you're going to draw a straight line, if you're going to have some measure of consistency, then where does the logic take you? And that's something that I think that if this initiative progresses, that's something that a lot of Idahoans may start to consider over the next. Well, and it would presumably be on the ballot in November 2018. I assume that's what they're aiming for. Idahoans would have quite a stretch to make up their minds about that, and a lot of elected officials would certainly be put on the hot seat to declare their position on it. And many implicitly already have. There are quite a few who have, in campaign statements and otherwise, already said that they see abortion as murder. So, it would clarify matters somewhat for some and force a couple of issues and questions for others.
If we get see them get the signatures, and they need tens of thousands, obviously, and if they get them and it gets to the ballot, and then let's say it passes, does it then immediately become law, or is there any debate in the legislature?
No, an initiative that passes becomes law without legislative action. The legislature could reverse or reject or upend the same as it does any other law, but it is an initiative is essentially a way of bypassing the legislature. And so I suppose in theory, presumably, the legislature could choose to adopt the same thing and kind of render the initiative moot if it chose to do that. I'm not not sure. I'm not predicting that it would, or that it would have any particular motivation to.
I have the impression that this is really uh, being done, and, they cited that case from 2012, that it's an effort to try to get this before the Supreme Court in Washington perhaps overturn Roe, and then really leave this up to the states across the country. Do you get the same
I
feeling?
I think that's probably well. I think that would be, or could prospectively be, what the effect could be. The what I imagine that the people who are behind this initiative aren't necessarily looking at it in sort of the laissez-faire view of necessarily of, well, let every state do what it wants. It has, these people clearly have a very specific view of what they think should be done, and they would much prefer that all 50 states, you know, fall in line with that. And that's my assumption. That might be a question for you to ask them,
Sure.
whether they think that's the case. But that could be, in theory, that could be the effect if the Supreme Court were to shift over the next few years in such a way that an overturning of Roe v. Wade could happen. An initiative like this could force, could lead to the legal conditions that could overturn it.
We're about 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock, and it's 41 on KLIX. Randy Stapilus, our guest from Idaho Weekly Briefing. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. And Randy, for people who'd like to look at the briefing, where would you send them?
I would send them to www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
There are some people, colleagues of yours in news media across Idaho, who seem a little surprised. The governor is looking at creating an education task force, and I guess it's because he's term limited, and who knows, could still be on his way to Washington. But there's some people scratching their heads about what this is really all about. What's your take on that?
Well, it's a little bit of a surprise, I suppose, in that there hasn't been the kind of public push or real immediate press for action on higher education the way that there was on public schools. With public schools, that was always kind of a front burner thing that a lot of people were talking about and asking for some kind of action. And I'm not sure that there's been the same kind of public pressure on higher education. There probably should have been, because in Idaho, as in a whole lot of other states, higher education, at least the public side of it, has been getting less and less funding. They've been running into more and more problems over the last number of years, and I would think that it's a fairly timely thing to consider. Of course, you can always argue that well, how much. Let's see how much credit should really be given for for forming another task force, and Butch Otter has certainly done a fair amount of forming of task forces over the years.
I would think that um, the discussions that we're having, none of them are new, though, right? I mean, it's not as if this task force is going to be bringing up something that people hadn't already discussed or proposed before.
Well, you don't know what they might come up with. There's always a possibility that you could look at all kinds of different actions. There are places where, for example, the funding levels have dropped enough, and the support from other kinds of sources has increased enough that they've looked at things that people wouldn't have even considered some years ago. Over in Oregon, there's been talk by some of the larger universities there, University of Oregon, Oregon State, to to ask the state legislature, ask the state to basically let them go from immediate state control. Let them go free, cut the state funding entirely, because they feel they might be better off without it. Uh, there are various ways of approaching some of these kinds of things. You have, for example, I should say community colleges now, uh, that rely on local, not state funding. There are a number of ways that you could approach both funding and other kinds of governance of the universities that a lot of people in Idaho may not have much discussed or much thought of. I don't know whether that's where this committee will go, but it could open some interesting doors.
I was talking with you off air about our weather, and of course, you have a lot more institutional knowledge of the way the weather's been here over the decades. I happened to be in Idaho Falls a couple of weeks ago, and a fellow at a radio station there was remembering back in the 1980s, there was a cold snap that literally in parts of Idaho, he was telling me, froze cattle and livestock in place, and some of it stayed there until the spring, and so this may be among the coldest stretches we've seen in this part of the country in a long, long time.
It has been it's the coldest, deepest winter weather that we've seen for quite a while, for a good many years. The last winter that I can recall, that in the interior Pacific Northwest that I can recall, that clearly beats this one, was back in '83. I remember in '83 I was in Pocatello, and the weather there, without wind chill, got down as low as 35 degrees, and I had flat tires from the sheer cold of it.
Well, that's from below
I
zero, right? Below zero.
35 degrees, 35 below zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember going out at 2 and 3 in the morning to start the car up for a while because you didn't dare to leave it just get cold all night. It was that cold, and it was like that for quite a few weeks. The Over in Boise, the snow piled up so rigorously, and it was so impervious that the joke was that the highway department's plan for road clearance was July. The it was a ferocious winter, and then there have been one or two since then that have been pretty strong, but this is one of the strongest that we've had in a long time.
It is just the nature of the shape of the state, the long panhandle in the north and then mountainous in the east as well. And yet this valley, there's so many different. One of the things that I noted when I first came here, I was driving from Utah coming north, I believe up Route 15, and I saw a sign that warned me of a microclimate for about 20 miles. That we have such a diverse, when it comes to weather here. I mean, it's going to be cold in eastern Idaho and in parts of northern Idaho, but this has really been, I mean, it's been statewide and region wide too, as well.
It has. It's one of the ironies that actually northern Idaho, up in the Panhandle, usually doesn't tend to become quite as cold as the South, because the South's weather is more like that of the Great Plains. When you get over to Idaho, toward Idaho Falls and out that way, the weather and some of the climate tends to match up a little bit with some of the climate that reaches across the Great Northern Interior. And that's a little less true by the time you get over to Twin Falls and Boise, but it can be very solidly frigid going all the way across, and southern Idaho can really be vulnerable to some of that.
And then the winds, obviously, you factor that in. A lot of parts of the country, just because of the topography here, they're not going to get the massive gusts that we see, or sometimes steady gusts that happen during a storm.
Well, and in Twin Falls is positioned, right toward the center of a large valley, so there's a little bit of a wind tunnel effect, and you'll get some considerable winds. Of course, out to the west toward the coast, there you get very heavy winds as well, but generally not quite such bitter cold as you will get in the interior. So by the time you add that wind down to the low temperature and get the wind chill, it can be pretty fierce.
I had to cover a story for a search for a missing child in the Adirondack Mountains in 1994, and I can remember getting up one morning and the standing air temperature was 46 below zero. I thought I'd left that behind for good. Um, Unfortunately,
No, not necessarily. Well, and if you go up into some places in the mountains, the Stanley area, for example, is often kind of renowned as one of the communities in Idaho that often has some of the lowest temperatures on record in the state of any community. And if you want to look for really low temperatures, I've seen temperatures along those lines reported in the Stanley area a number of times. Not in the last few winters so much, but over the years I have.
Randy, about 20 seconds. What's the web address again?
It is www.ridenbaugh.com, RIDENBAUGH.
We look forward to speaking with you again next Monday. Have a great week.
We'll talk to you then.
Randy Stapilus joining us this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. We're going to talk about the weather, in fact, coming up in the next segment and some of the problems we're going to have in the next few days.